Thank you so much for choosing Q95 tonight. This is the Global View on Q. A very warm welcome to all of you in the Q family, all of our listeners at home and globally. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It's Tuesday, 22nd of August, the 34th Tuesday of 2023. It's exactly 8 p.m. at Q95, the big station. We're live on Facebook and on YouTube. Follow us, please, at Q95 FM Radio. The on air phone numbers are on the homepage of our website at www.q95ga.com. Please share the live, like our pages, get the latest breaking news and reviews only on Q95, the big station. So we continue tonight to revive the spirit of graciousness, of love and peace and prosperity and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters, as we always do. And tonight, I'm joined by very distinguished guests, Justice Dr. Vingandre, Miss Marceline Edwards, Mr. Alvin Thomas, and social scientist rather, I believe, Simeon Joseph. One of those days, Simeon will give me the correct designation for him. Well, we will, in fact, examine the current situation of Dominica's efforts to achieve new electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations in order to improve the process to ensure every qualified citizen or resident is freely and fairly exercise their right to vote in the country's elections on a level playing field with the added goal of preserving their democracy. So let us all be mindful that the current parliament is the place where ultimately any new electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations must be tabled by the executive branch of the government for debate and for passage. So I have a few questions and talking points as we start tonight. One, the balance of the national consultations, in my view, should be moderated by the Chief Elections Officer under the auspices of the Electoral Commission and the international observers, and should be held in each and every constituency in Dominica, not just in DLP strongholds. Number two, no members of the political directorate or political parties should engage in the remaining consultations. They have had their say already, and in any event, they can all hold their own consultations in the constituencies. So tonight, you want to hear, and we want to hear some other voices. A broad-based national committee, that's number three. I recommend a broad-based national committee that comprises representatives of major interest groups and sectors like the business forum, political parties, religious groups, the bar association, civic organizations, trade unions, public sector workers, representatives, etc. These must be set up to undertake the final review, rather, and arrive at a consensus and approve the new draft electoral laws and regulations containing the people's proposals that is drawn up by a local drafts person or persons following the National Electoral Reform Consultation. And number four, the new people approved draft laws and regulations should then be submitted to the Electoral Commission for its commence. The Electoral Commission must then present the people's draft laws and regulations to the political directorate, who will table them in the parliament for debate and passage into law. Now, the speaker, number six, the speaker in the parliament must allow full, open, free, and equitable debate on the bills pertaining to electoral reform, campaign finance reform, and changes in the regulations. All members of the parliament are expected to vigorously and substantively debate the new electoral campaign finance bills and on the proposed regulations. The new laws and regulations should include a proposal from the Dominican diaspora residents to virtually participate via an app on their phone or computer in electing one representative for each of two virtual constituencies, one being the Caribbean region, in my view, and the other being the rest of the world. So finally, the diaspora people would really have a representative. They don't have one now. A parliamentary representative is elected for a period of 5 years to, to specifically look after the interests of the people living in one specific constituency. Nobody is disenfranchised by any PAL rep if they do not reside in that specific constituency. Which PAL rep has been looking after the interests of diaspora for the past 23 years? Somebody tell me. What is the real story behind that famous email and the response to it? Why some DLP handlers claiming falsely that it was as regards disenfranchisement of overseas residents? Well, here is what that email actually says and the response and actions taken immediately thereafter based on the instructions contained in it. Here is the first email from Anthony Astafan. It's dated Thursday, 27th of March 2008, 10:27 a.m. Subject urgent to Roosevelt Skerritt, copy to Alec Lazar, and copy to Hartley Henry. Brother, please do not drift too far. I tried calling you again today and just cannot get through. I spoke to Kondwani this morning. There is madness going on at the commission. You need to call in Richard and Kondwani. I live today. These guys are talking about reforms to include ID cards and complete re-registration. Such reforms will undermine your re-election legacy, as the opposition will say, look, the commission agreed with us. Reform was required because of widespread fraud. That is signed by Anthony W. Astafan, SC. Can anybody tell me where in that email is any reference to overseas voters and their disenfranchisement? The only thing that is mentioned here is there's concern about the re-election winning legacy of Mr. Skerritt. So here is a response from Alec. And remember that Anthony Asafan's email is dated March 27, 2008. Alec Lawrence responds on the 20th of April 2008. And he said, hi, comrades. I am due to attend my first commission meeting on Tuesday at 9 a.m. So you can understand now that email, the response to that email was Richard Charles was called. He's no longer on the commission. Alec Lawrence is now in. Why? Because of what the email requested. It says, I'm due to attend my first commission meeting on Tuesday at 9 a.m. Although due to a mediation at 10 a.m., I am only able to spend 1 hour there. I see from the document sent to me that the commission has taken a decision to introduce a new voter registration system before the next election. I have serious reservations about this and would like to have a chat with you both about it. I would prefer not to do so via email. Tony, I understand that such a new system was introduced in St. Kitts, in St. Lucia, and possibly in St. Vincent. Can you get me for tomorrow info on how long the implementation process took in those islands? Regards, Alec. So you see, and I hope Dr. Andre, you'll be able to help us with all of that, because you see, there is no mention in any of that about trying to prevent overseas voters from being disenfranchised. Just like I heard last night at this consultation, and the moderator said absolutely nothing about it. And one or two people are saying this is the only reason why that email, and somebody is misinterpreting the email of this the senior counsel. So I'm saying these consultations need to be removed from the control of the political directorate and be moderated by more neutrally, be moderated more neutrally and more transparently. So I will ask my guests tonight to express their views on these and other matters related to electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations. The expected conduct of parliamentary proceedings during the debate of the new laws and regulations, and of course, the prospects for healthy, substantive debate on these proposed electoral laws and regulations. I will also ask my guests to help the people to understand what life is really like under dictatorial system of government and to show the stark difference between people's lives under a one-man dictatorial parliament and a functioning democracy that is based on free and fair elections on a level playing field, and to show how people's lives are affected differently under a dictator versus under good democratic governance. I will ask them to also show the extent to which a vibrant, informed, balanced parliament can forestall further detrimental, negative international collateral damage to Dominicans through the implementation of genuine electoral campaign finance laws and regulations, free and fair elections. Let me hasten to remind you that electoral and campaign finance reforms and free and fair elections are meant to forestall dictatorial leaders from handpicking every candidate for election on a party ticket and to provide good and accountable government that forestalls carefully handpicked thieves from kicking back non-stop billions into overseas accounts. We hear about what, 9 billion, 8 billion, and into political party campaigns to keep a party in power, in office for 50 years. And let us also be reminded that the real reason why the Dominican Labour Party's leader wants to take control of the current reformed electoral system is not because he wants to improve the quality of life of the people. It is mostly for the purpose of securing an election winning legacy at any cost and to continue transforming Dominica into a one party dictatorship. And let us all ask ourselves, in whose interest has the fight to steal these elections been waged in the past? Has it redounded to the benefit of the farmers, the fishermen, the local contractors, the local equipment owners and operators and skilled Dominicans, the public officers, the young entrepreneurs, or for young people on the block that were simply relegated to smoking cannabis but not to gain wealth from processing the essential medicine oils and other byproducts from that plant? Is there an effort now on the way to buy these preordained results of these electoral reform consultations for this $650,000? Money that probably could have been much better invested in plants and fertilizer and markets for farmers' produce. So our discussions tonight will focus on getting our people to understand and to see that it is the people who benefit from free and fair elections. As you can see, politicians now have a tendency and a very bad habit of just working for themselves and for a select few of their close friends. But you must make it clear to them by your own firm actions that they must work for you, the people, otherwise, you will vote them out of office. So, as we focus tonight on the important issue of residency, and who should have the right to select a parliamentary representative, let's remember that a PAL rep is rarely selected specifically for a period of 5 years to speak on behalf of the people living in one specific constituency. No one is disenfranchised by that PAL rep if they do not reside in that constituency. Now, the strength of any government depends on the independence of parliamentarians to work directly for the improvement of the lives of their constituents. Is that really happening? If parliamentarians begin to feel that their power comes from people living abroad who are paid to come down and vote for them to win, they will likely not feel any commitment to work diligently for those persons who are locally resident in their constituencies. And be mindful, of course, that free and fair elections and democracy is beyond partisanship. The cause of nation building is beyond partisan politics. It is about the quality of our sincerity to regain the soul of our nation. Too many stakeholders are still sitting back and never sharing their views or their wisdom or their wealth. Sitting on the fence and hiding in the shadows is no longer an option. Most Dominicans believe that now is the time for informed, unified action by the masses of the people who possess the people power. So my distinguished guests tonight, Justice Dr. Irvin Andre, Ms. Marston Edwards, Mr. Alvin Thomas, and Simeon Joseph, they will share their views on these issues and help us decide on the actions that we must take on the way forward to secure free and fair elections that will give us good, accountable, and transparent government and return us to the path of democracy, take Dominica from crisis to recovery, and restore the respect of the international community. And I'm sure that my guests will speak about the consequences of having these tainted elections, as referenced by the CCJ, that result in weak parliaments, bad governance, and unique and undue foreign influence. I hope they will also speak to Dominica's future economic prospects under good governance arising out of free and fair elections. And by the way, I'm advised that there will be a match for electoral reform and other essential issues tomorrow, Wednesday. And I trust that arising out of the recent Dominica Business Forum consultations on electoral and campaign finance reforms and regulations all of the leaders of the groups and stakeholders that contributed to the remarkable proposals that came out of the DBF and other consultations will be an integral part of that match. And I look forward to hearing the voices of the leaders of those groups on the platform of that match tomorrow in vociferously advocating for the proposed electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations. So we look forward to securing good governance that will stop the hemorrhage in our economy, take it from crisis recovery, lift the people out of poverty and mendicancy, and improve their daily lives and livelihoods. So wherever you are in Dominica, the region, and globally, please tune in now. Call us, join the conversation, get the answers to your questions, be a part of the solution on the big station. A huge shout out, of course, much hugs, love, and appreciation, and a big thank you to our healthcare providers, our frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, nurses, all the public private sector patriots. We welcome each and every Dominican and friend of Dominica to the Global View on Q. We embrace you wherever you are tonight, in every nook and cranny, in every village, every community in Dominica, in the region and globally. Thank you, Sherwin, keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi, on the console at Q95, directing the traffic. We will take your calls a little later. People's voice is always a priority on the Global View on Q. So let's get started. I go now to Justice Dr. Irving Andre to examine the state of Dominica's electoral and campaign finance reform and regulations efforts, the state of preparedness of Dominican parliamentarians, and the state of preparedness of the Speaker of the House to engage in free and equitable substantive debates, and especially with respect to the anticipated debates on the bills with respect to electoral campaign finance reform and regulations that must be tabled in the Parliament for passage into law without stifling opposition presentations and free speech by continuously invoking the imputing improper motives cliche. You get the first word, Dr. Andre. Could you unmute your mic?
Well, the mic is unmuted, and let me congratulate or let me say good evening to the fellow panelists, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Joseph, Ms. Edwards, yourself, Lambi, Sherwin, who is at the back, your listeners. I hope tonight is not Rabbit Festival, because I think what I anticipate these panelists are going to say is very important, and hopefully everyone will have an opportunity to listen carefully to what is being said. It is clear to any objective observer that what is posing or masquerading as a consultation is in fact a ring circus. The fact of the matter is there has been a significant amount of misinformation, miscategorization, blatant deception in terms of some of the representations made by some of the speakers. And there has been no, and worse, you may notice that after the presentation of someone who has a contrary view, a person, typically a lawyer, is allowed to comment in a somewhat negative fashion without the presenter getting an opportunity to respond. Now, I must say that I had gotten an opportunity to respond to some of the things that were said, but not in the type of expansive fashion that I would have liked. I'm going to address at least two of what, in my view, are blatant misconceptions, which were peddled at this consultation without any correction by anyone present. During my presentation and in a rejoinder, the Attorney General said something to the effect that he does not believe that, well, it's not just him. There was a Minister of Government who said something, a similar thing in his presentation a day before. He doesn't believe that if you pay the airfare or seafare for a Dominican abroad to travel to Dominica with the express or implied intention of having that person vote for a specific candidate or his or her party, constitutes the offense of bribery. That's what the Attorney General says. And as I said, he was not the only one, quite frankly. And that is astounding. It is astounding for a few reasons. One, even so, Byron said in his final report that he did not specifically include the provision of airfare and seafare he did not specifically include that in his definition of bribery because it is stated so clearly in Halesbury's Laws of England, which is a little legal Bible for practitioners. And in his report, he says, I am paraphrasing what he says, that Halesbury's Laws of England indicate that the promise or payment to a voter of his or her traveling expenses with the, again, I'm paraphrasing, with intention, because that's the critical thing, the intention. That intention could be expressly stated, I'm giving you a ticket to enable you to vote for me. Or, I know who you are, I know your political beliefs, I know you are one of us, and therefore I'm giving you a ticket and traveling expenses and spending expenses to go to Dominica to vote in a particular constituency. Oh, I'll come back to that because that's important. That, under any definition, constitutes the offense of bribery. The Attorney General can believe what he wants. But again, I say with the greatest respect to the Attorney General, because I have a lot of respect for his office and anyone who holds that office. But if for 1 minute he believes that the band movie that has been happening in Dominica over 3 electoral cycles, when hundreds of Dominicans come to Dominica to vote, if that does not constitute bribery, let me say with the greatest of respect, the Attorney General need to take a refresher course on Criminal Law 101. And I believe I'm in a position to advise him. And he may not like that advice, but that's his business. Secondly, Mr. Edison James made an excellent point today and also last evening. Because the main justification, you may have heard a number of speakers who, if you accept this consultation process, who just appeared out of nowhere and spoke about their desire not to be disenfranchised. Mr. James made an excellent point. We just had a general election in December of 2022. And it appears that not a single one of these overseas voters appeared to vote. Take advantage of the enfranchisement. That leads to one rational conclusion. They only come down to vote because their passages are being paid. And if all the reports I've heard are true, they are receiving spending money in the process. So with all this talk about, no, I don't want to be disenfranchised, their only interest is a free ticket and spending money. And that is why if anyone has to complain about being disenfranchised, it's the voter on the ground, the voter ordinarily resident in Dominica. But let me correct a further bit of misinformation peddled by the Attorney General. He keep referring to the case called R versus Frank, a Canadian case. And he says his argument is simple. The Supreme Court of Canada correctly struck down a provision which prevented persons who've been 5 years abroad from voting. And he went on to say that that is an indication of the significance of the voting process. And that provides ample justification why there should be no such limitation in Dominica. The poor fellow, in my respectful view, did not or hasn't even read the whole case. And here's why. The Supreme Court of Canada did strike down that provision. But let me refer to two parts of one, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is equivalent to Dominica's Constitution, but equivalent not specifically in its provisions, but the overarching authority of the Canadian Rights and Freedoms. Let me just refer you to two sections, and then I'll read you parts of the case which show how that case has no application in Dominica. Section 3, I'm going to quote you section 1 and 3, but I'll start with section 3. It says, every citizen of Canada has the right to vote in an election of members of the House of Commons or of a legislative assembly. and there's some wording afterwards, but these words are not relevant to our purposes this evening. Section 1 says the rights and freedoms are subject to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstratively justifiable in a free and democratic society. So the Supreme Court was clear that there was a violation. This prohibition, this 5-year limitation, was a violation of Section 3. There were 5 justices. There were 7 justices who heard the case. Of those 7, 5 basically said that the limitation placed on persons or Canadians who were abroad for 5 years were not demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic society. And therefore, the Supreme Court correctly decided that the 5-year limitation should be struck down. But listen to parts of the judgment that speaks to us very eloquently, which is what the Attorney General is missing. Well, I don't think he's missing it. He's just not saying it, because it flies in the face of everything that he's saying about this case. Well, assuming without deciding that he's read the whole case. Here's what is stated at paragraph 105, the concurring decision of a justice called Justice Rowe, R-O-W-E. It says, the Attorney General has offered no evidence of the impact that long-term non-residents would or could have had either locally or nationally if permitted to vote. Now remember this phrase because I'll come back to it. The Attorney General offered no evidence of the impact that long-term non-residents would or could have. In other words, the Attorney General offered no evidence as to the impact of the voting of long-term or non-residents on Canadian elections. That's the crux of the decision with respect to Section 1, which I just read to you. Now, here's what it says, and I'll read it because it drives a stake in the heart of Levi Peters' argument, which is, in my view, nonsense. Here's what it says, and I'll read it in its entirety. What evidence we have suggests that the impact would likely be negligible. We'll come back to that. Listen, a very small number of Canadians living abroad who are currently eligible to vote choose to exercise their right to vote through a special ballot. In the election that followed the implementation of the special voting rules, etc., a little over 15,000 special ballots were requested and issued. In the 2011 election, in the 10 Canadian ridings with the highest number of special ballots, as a percentage of total registered electors in that constituency, the non-resident votes ranged from a low of 0.05% to a high of 0.2%. Elections Canada reported that barely 6,000 votes were recorded from international electors. While these numbers pertain to non-residents who were eligible to vote under the current statutory scheme, that is to say, citizens who were non-resident for less than 5 years, they are nonetheless instructive. As the trial judge explained in the application decision, quote, it is hard to see what unfairness is being visited on the resident majority by the voting of other non-resident citizens. In such circumstances, the salutary effects are inconsequential. This would be different if large numbers of non-resident voters cast ballots, especially if they did so in a coordinated way so as to maximize the impact on election results. You understand the crux of the decision, Mr. G? You understand that when you juxtapose that to what's been happening in Dominica?
Right.
Hundreds in the Dominican context, hundreds of persons are paid to come to vote, but not to vote anywhere, not to vote in La Cousette Line or Bellevue-Chopin or Dale-la-Ozine in Portsmouth, but to vote in targeted constituencies. The evidence is clear. So what is happening in Dominica is a direct opposite to what the Supreme Court of Canada is saying in that decision. First of all, the applicants, Dr. Frank and another gentleman called Dr. Long, they were paid their passage. They were Canadians, they had family here, they went to study, and they want to come back to vote. And they petitioned the court on that basis. And the court is saying, well, look, the impact of voters who have lived outside of Canada for 5 years has no discernible effect on the election results. None whatsoever. But when you have voters being parachuted to vote into Roseau Central, hundreds of them, in those constituencies where the race is evenly balanced, whether it's in Castle Bruce, Roseau Central, what asked Thompson about Grafon? He won by 6 votes. After 3 or 4 recounts, he lost. This is the type of gerrymandering that we're dealing with. What application, may I ask, does this case of Frank have in the Dominican case? Absolutely zero. This is why, Mr. G, as I pointed out in my presentation to the commission, not a single attorney general, save and except this one. Because bear in mind one thing, let me say in parenthesis, the attorney general is supposed to be the lawyer for the people, not for the government. But go and tell Levi Peter that now.
Exactly.
Listen to Levi Peter. Huh? You would think he's the high priest on high for the political directorate. It's an embarrassment. Total embarrassment. But as I said, not one attorney general in the English-speaking Caribbean, whether Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Antigua, St. Kitts, have adopted that reasoning in Frank. Why? Because it will literally kibosh free and fair elections in those islands. Let me remind you something before I go on. It is often said that there are more Dominicans living abroad than here. We know that there are already 46,000 economic citizens. We're not talking about Dominicans per se, born Dominicans or naturalized. We're talking about those who bought their ticket, for example. 46,000. We have supposedly 70,000 people in Dominica. Of those 70,000, perhaps on about 45, if all that, are eligible to vote. So imagine the number of eligible voters, if they're allowed to participate in our election, who live abroad, the impact that would have on general elections in Dominica. It would be a colossal waste of time. And that is why the political directorate is clinging tenaciously to this suggestion proposed by Sir Byron, that persons who visited, come to look at Tululu crabs, come to buy a little crab back, a little black pudding, Mr. G, without pepper from Mrs. Jack's backyard, they meet the criterion for voting in Dominica. Can you imagine the chaos? Can you imagine the blatant or patent unfairness if that interpretation is allowed to prevail? This is not a UWP or the DLP. This is a matter involving the survival of Dominica as a democracy. Whether we just give Dominica over to the political directorate, or whether we ensure that it remains true to its democratic traditions. And this is why the passport sellers have been so gung-ho in protecting their turf, Mr. G, in fighting tooth and nail to preserve this sorry scheme of things entire.
Do you think that maybe one of the main reasons why passport sellers now dominate the electoral commission?
But of course, it's obvious. The answer is not blowing in the winds. It's right here. It's right here before us. This is blatant self-interest in its most ugly and negative fashion. The only thing you are missing is a priest to come and say, Gasso, that is all good. That's all you're missing. You're missing a priest to bless that state of corruption. Or are you missing one, really? Or you have one already? Based on what I heard last evening.
That's the next question I intend to ask Simeon.
Well, before the man of the cloth, Simeon Joseph, speak, there's something else I want to talk about.
Mr.
You
Gregoire.
know, I talk about the St. Kitts situation. Where's my people? Isn't it ironic, Mr. G, that the only attorney general in the Eastern Caribbean post that decision in R versus Frank, who took any steps with respect to the eligibility of overseas islanders being able to vote or participate in a general election, is one from St. Kitts, where Sir Byron hails from. But worse, that attorney general was his brother. I thought he was two sisters' children, but somebody told me it was his own brother. His brother sought to amend, and let me read something to you, because we have to attack this without any fear. His brother basically suggested that that's not right. His brother introduced a bill in the St. Kitts Parliament to amend the National Assembly Elections Act, to amend what was then Section 37A, to replace the following phrase, ordinarily resident on the registration date, with the words, quote, ordinarily resident for at least 6 months before the registration date, to tighten the restrictions with respect to the voting eligibility. But you know why he did so? Here is what you said. And for those fellows who are listening and who's going to concoct some story, Andrew's just making this up. I'm looking at the St. Kitts and Nevis Observer in an article titled End of the Overseas Voter. There's a question. The article was written by LaShawn Dixon, Dixon, and it's dated April 9, 2018. And he quoted Attorney General Vincent Byron Jr., who indicated, quote, that there were 34,000 persons living in St. Kitts and Nevis who were 18 and over and were able to vote, while 9,000 individuals overseas are also eligible to vote. So 9 and 4 is 36 is a little over 25% of the number of persons living in St. Kitts and Nevis who were eligible to vote. And here's what he said. Byron, not to be confused with Sir Byron, we're talking about Vincent now, explained that 20% of the voter population do not reside in the Federation, and the matter ought to be reviewed. And here's a direct quote from Vincent, quote, we have to go back to the drawing board and determine if someone can fly in on a Sunday night, vote on a Monday, and fly out on the Monday night. Some 9,000, 20%. We need to have a national dialogue on that issue. In simple English, we cannot allow that to continue or to persist. In Dominica, the percentage is even higher, much higher. But that is what these fellas want. They, left to them, an economic citizen can just send a text. I want to vote. I love you so much. And who are they going to vote for? Huh? You tell me, Mr. G. I know today is Rabbit Festival, and I know that you don't have too many listeners this evening.
The guy with the dimples. The guy with the dimples.
The guy who sold them the... Wasn't there a news item about someone called Allison?
Yes,
I
saw
Allison Maduike from Nigeria, charged with bribery. It's right there.
Yeah.
It's right there. And one of the presenters last evening talked about the damage these people, and one of the priest, oh Jesus wept, paternoster. The priest talked about people who are damaging Dominica by talking about these things. Do you understand, Mr. G, the amount of reputational damage that the seal of passports that has engendered for Dominica? Evidenced by what the British has done, evidenced by the conditions the Europeans and Americans are imposing. Can you quantify the amount of damage to Dominica's reputation as a country of rules and law and order that has done. And you have some of these fellas talking about the damage that conscientious Dominicans are inflicting on Dominica because they have the audacity or the courage to say this is not right. This is the band movie that is passing for good governance in Dominica. How can any man of the cloth or anybody defend this? Defend the defenseless. Let's put it that way. Mr. G, I'm sorry to tell you, but that is why they will have no use for virtual constituencies.
Oh well,
After you made that recommendation, I heard there was a comment about, how are you going to impose that, practice that? But let me tell these folks, in France, Mr. G, 11 out of 577 members of parliament became members of parliament through virtual constituencies. In Jordan, you have similar provisions for these things. And as you know, virtual constituencies could be based either on geographic demarcations abroad or geographic demarcations within the home country, whether it's 2, 3, or 4. The diasporans can vote in those virtual constituencies and elect someone who can make representations on their behalf to protect their interests in parliament without contaminating the voting process, which the payment of persons abroad to come to vote to Dominica does. Without that vice, without that contaminating vice, but they love it. I heard the Father Thomas talk about hate. In a sense, Mr. G, all of us are haters. I hate black pudding with pepper, to be honest with you. I don't like it at all. I bet Father Thomas hate, how should I put it? Hate persons who disrespect others.
I noticed you hesitated before you described that.
Well, I have to choose my words. I'm not as eloquent as you know. Persons who avoid close encounters of an intimate kind. Yes. I bet he hates that to its core. So he's a hater too. But we're talking about the future of Dominica. We're talking about best practices. And if none of the other islands in the Caribbean has adopted this frank decision, because they see how it would undermine and destroy their democracies, that should tell us something. Was it Louis Armstrong who, in his famous song, "Fools walk in where angels fear to tread"? That is the problem. We are blundering into someone where all intelligent, right-thinking, conscientious thinking, persons of integrity, they've concluded, we will not go that way to allow anyone who is over 18 vote, which is some of the views you heard expressed during this consultation. And I'm laughing when I heard this, because you know and I know what they're interested in is the free ticket. That's all. And the free spending money. Not one of them showed up in December to vote, as Edison James so rightly commented. But isn't that the problem? It's all about money. The sale of passports is about money. Coming to vote is about money. Buying washing machines or Tide is about money. Well, Mr. G, I know that you don't use the old wash machine board again. I understand that. You've moved up in the world. You don't use blue again. Well, blue as in blue. If you check Wikipedia, it'll tell you blue is what we used to use when washing on these old boards and so on. But like I said, that's a little before your time. But it's all about money. It's not about what is good for Dominica. But didn't Al Jazari caution you about this, Mr. G? 90% for them and 10% for Dominica. It's bread. That's the important thing. And Dominica is being sacrificed. And the interpretation that is being placed on this whole business about overseas voting is like a noose around the neck of free and fair elections in Dominica. Thank you very much.
And Dr. Andre, thank you for that. And Simeon, the good priest, as Dr. Andre referred to him, when I look for a priest, I choose to go to people like Branca John and Monsignor John Lewis and Father Nigel Karam. And these are some of the priests I look to. Yes, there are a number of others. Um, but the good priest, maybe if he had just read a little bit, he'd have realized, first of all, it was Rosie Douglas's first suggestion to have virtual constituencies, Rosie Douglas. And then secondly, if he had done a little bit more reading, he might have had the information that Dr. Andre just gave us, that is something that happens. And again, if he had listened to that young man called Firelander, you'd have heard this young man talking about digitization and coming to the modern world where you can do things by remote. If he had listened to some of the kids around, he would have told him, but good praise, sometimes when I have to open up my phone, they use my eye or my fingerprint. The technology is already there. That's what the kids are doing. The priest is out of touch with the young people, it seems. But then sometimes our vision can be cloudy because we're so engrossed in supporting something that we're not even sure if it's right or wrong. And we don't even care really, that we forget about other things. So we don't do the little research. So Simeon, let us look at this a little bit. I'll tell you why I chose to mention it and to introduce you that way. I was very impressed with the presentation made by Monsignor John Lewis. I was extremely impressed with the presentation made by Father Nigel Karam. And one of the things that struck me is that the expressions on their face, because when this other person was speaking, because I didn't understand how it is that Father Nigel Karam is representing the church or the Christian Council, and Monsignor John is representing the church. And then somebody else is speaking. And these are people who are, and I don't understand why somebody else is speaking. Who are they representing? I didn't understand it. And the way they spoke was totally different from the way Monsignor John Lewis and Father Nigel Karam spoke. Simeon, give me your thoughts. As Dr. Andre said, you're a man of the cloth, or maybe almost a man of the cloth.
I was almost.
Almost a man of the cloth. Let's talk about these things and see how they relate to what we're talking about here tonight.
Okay, thank you, Mr. G. Good evening to our listeners. Dr. Andre, I mean, you're just the best in terms of your infusion of socio-political life on the legal interpretation. It's always a good thing to have you around. Maslin, of course, my lady. I remember when I was at Margaret Secondary School, she was a strong supporter of mine from Concord, etc. Right, Maslin? And of course, I cannot, a gentleman I haven't seen, I think, for 30 plus years, Alvin Thomas. Used to worship together at the cathedral on Sunday mornings. Mr. G, thank you for this. It's good that we are discussing it. Let me just say three things before we start, based on what you asked me. Contrary to you, I respect all priests, good and bad, because my belief in the priesthood is not in the person, but in the sacramentality of the person who is who embodies what you call the mission, the vocation. Because my faith, my Catholic faith, tells me that it is not in men and institutions that we put our faith, but in the divine will of God as He acts in human beings. So, good or bad, I am open to all priests. It is just unfortunate, and I would say further. Having said so, however, I would like to say one thing: he who pays the piper plays the tune. We can leave that to the interpretation however we want. Okay, I'll repeat that. He who pays the piper plays the tune. So we can leave that to interpretation, and we can do our own investigations in that regard. The third thing I want to say is, just by what you introduced me, what came to mind is a Bible verse And it says in John, where Jesus says, I have come that you may have life, but the evil one comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And whenever you see a level of robbery or theft or denial or the stealing of people of their just goods, you know that is satanic. Whenever you see the death of many things, whether death by human form, death of institutions, whenever you see the death of organizations, and in our case, almost Dominica, you know Satan is involved. And lastly, to destroy. That is one of the works of the devil. And it's unfortunate that the beast has so shown his face in Dominica that he is now destroying the church. He is now manifesting his presence among priests and pastors and the church, so much so that there is a division and a divide in how the church speaks to people. I would like to say, like you, I was very impressed with Fael and Nathalie, the lady for, I think last night, and in addition to Mr. James, there were the three, and Pastor Rodney, they were the three most poignant presenters at the presentation last night. We can talk about other presentations after. Having said so, I am very proud of Father John Lewis, because being a theologian myself, which is one of the branch of my social sciences, philosophy, political science, theology, sociology, just to explain to you. So that's what makes a social scientist. A sociologist is someone whose discipline is sociology. But I'm a social scientist because I have studied the liberal arts of theology, philosophy, sociology, political science, economics, and history. So that makes me a social scientist. And not only that, I have been so that's it. No, when I wish to impose my knowledge on those things, I am mindful of what because Father John Lewis represented the Catholic Church. And as I said this morning, we need to be mindful in the Catholic Church that nobody can just get up on their own and speak on behalf of the Catholic Church. Anyone who speaks on the Catholic behalf must have consensus. No bishop, no priest can just issue a statement. And I'm absolutely certain, and I'm very proud of Father John Lewis, that his articulations this morning were solidly based on the Catholic Church social teaching of forming of conscience in political arena. We know the Catholic Church has many social documents. We know that the bishops across the world and Rome, and even our own former Bishop Bogart in 1980, issued a political directorate. He called it a message for the Christian electorate. So we have precepts and principles upon which priests can speak. And I can say further that I am absolutely certain that Father John Lewis didn't speak on his own as the representative of the Catholic Church. I am absolutely certain that he spoke as the collective voice of the clergy in Dominica, whom I'm sure all contributed to his presentation as the apostolic administrator who is in charge of the Catholic Church in the absence of the bishop. The apostolic, he's the delegate to the apostolic administrator. We don't have a bishop. Bishop Malza is still in charge of the Diocese of Roseau. So Father John Lewis is now his delegate until we have a bishop. And I'm absolutely certain that the process of Father John Lewis representing the Catholic Church was followed to the T. I'm absolutely certain that he had the consensus to say what he said on behalf of, one, the official teachings of the Catholic Church, the collective documentation of the Catholic Church on politics and the church and politics and democracy and human rights and justice. I'm absolutely certain he said so, and he spoke on that behalf. Secondly, Father Karam, I know, spoke on behalf of the Dominica Christian Council, which is a body made up of Catholics, Methodists, and Anglican. Father Karam spoke because he represented Reverend Mona Fraser, who is the chairperson of the Dominica Christian Council. She cannot be there because she leaves Dominica tomorrow. And so in the absence of an Anglican priest, there are Anglicans, there are 3 Anglicans of the Dominica Christian Council in the absence of a priest. We have the Methodist minister from Roseau and Portsmouth and Marigot, as well as some Methodists on the Christian Council. And we have the Bishop of Roseau, who is not there, but Father Karam, Father Charles Martin, who is not well, myself and a few people, or 2 other Catholics on the Dominican Christian Council. So again, we met on 3 occasions or 2 occasions to look at Sir Dennis Byron's report. And I'm absolutely certain that what Father Karam presented was a synopsis, or rather a summary of the contributions of the collective of the Dominican Christian Council. Okay, so I'm absolutely certain those gentlemen did not say their own thing. They did not speak on their own behalf. They duly and properly represented the organizations of which, and that is how it happens, out of respect for things. Having said so, Mr. Gregoire, I do, and I can say certainly that I can know that any other priest who spoke last night certainly was not speaking on behalf of the Catholic Church, certainly was not speaking on behalf of the Dominican Christian Council, and may perhaps be singing the tune of the piper. I just want to say that without reservation. It is sad, it is unfortunate, because it projected a certain level of division. As a Catholic and knowledgeable of the process, I think I have a responsibility to stand instead and clarify the position of the church, the position of the Dominican Christian Council, 2 of which I have been. I am also part of the Justice and Peace Commission of the Diocese of Roseau, and I'm a consultant to the Bishops of the Caribbean on Integral Human Development. So I speak from a certain position of knowledge, first-hand insight as to how these things evolve. I think it was unfortunate that anybody should take a position separate and apart from that, and it has opened up the Catholic Church in total to a lot of criticism, unwarranted disrespect, because of the fact that people do not realize that when you fall within that profession, when you fall within that vocation, your religious conviction needs to be stronger than your political affiliation. As a priest, as a messenger of the cloth, as someone you in terms of the hierarchy of your commitment, your religious conviction must precede and take precedence over your political affiliation. I think it is unfortunate when people allow their political affiliation to take precedence over their religious conviction in that regard. I would say that, and that would be my opening statement on the matter. Having said so, Mr. Gregoire, allow me to say a few more things on.
Look like we've temporarily lost Simeon, but I'm pretty sure that he'll probably get his internet back again, and he'll probably be with us momentarily. So we're going to give him a moment, but while we wait for Simeon, maybe we can talk a little bit to you, Maslin, because one of the reasons why I really wanted to hear from you and Alvin tonight is because I know that I had sent you a link for that consultation when the diaspora were presenting, and I know that you were there. You log in, and I know that you were waving your hand just like me and Dr. and Andrew and so on. But for some reason, I did not hear you speak. It's only after I called you afterwards, and I called Alvin, and you said, nobody recognized me. Nobody allowed me to come in. So it appears that some preferential arrangements were taking place there. So I was just talking to Master until he got back.
Yeah. So I wanted to say in terms of my, I think my notes touched the key and then it totally took me off. Okay. Because I've been, in light of what you asked me, okay, and what has been taking place so far, I want to look at tonight's context, and particularly, I must say, even after listening to the consultation in Portsmouth tonight, which to me was a mess for all intents and purposes. It was a political haranguing. So when I look at I followed all the consultations across the board. I want to say from a meetings, incentives, and conferences perspective, one cannot call that a consultation because there are certain prerequisites and characteristics to a consultation, which this thing, for all intents and purposes, is not. Okay? We can deal with that on another matter. But my takeaways from that and my suggestions in our discussion tonight, I want to look at certain topics. One, the forming of conscience. When I listen to the presentations of the people and the reactions of those who support the government and those who oppose and make all these sarcastic remarks about electoral reform, certain things come to mind, right? From a faith perspective, from a sociological perspective, from a political perspective. And the first thing that comes to mind is the forming of conscience. How much are people true to themselves? Do they really believe what they are saying? Does their conscience really speak to the truth? What is their conviction? Where are they coming from? What is the basis? And then therefore, apart from that, because one of the main issues talks about the right to vote. So on the parallel level of the formation of conscience has to do with the definition of a faithful citizen. Anybody can be a citizen, Dominica and overseas. But let us look at that. What constitutes a faithful citizen? Because for me, whilst we discuss the topic, we must keep those two things into mirrored perspective. The formation of conscience in terms of why people act, why they say what they say, and their intentions, and being a faithful citizen. Okay? And what is our call to political responsibility? This is very important. If we have to understand our call to political responsibility, we must look at our consciences. How do we form our conscience? And that's a very loaded thing to do, as well as how faithful we are as citizens, whether we live in Dominica or we live overseas. And so that leads me to what I see and how I come to assess the whole electoral process we have been over the past 15 years. And what seems to be happening now, it seems to me that we are leading towards the politics of delegitimation of election in Dominica. By that I mean, there's an effort to diminish, destroy the legitimacy and the prestige of the authority of elections in Dominica. I will repeat that. This delegitimation process and all these subtleties coming out from the consultations, I am seeing more and more a subtle effort to diminish, destroy the legitimacy, prestige, and authority of the electoral process in Dominica, and almost to want to make the whole process illegal. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are the ethical imperatives? And what are the moral obligations of our electors? The people who go to vote, those who come from wherever they come from, what are their ethical intentions? If we have to say we have to form conscience and be faithful citizens, what are our ethical intentions in that regard? And what are the moral obligations of people who say they want to have the right to vote? Because the ethics and the morality of their intentions and the responsibility of what they do is very important. Because every citizen has a political responsibility. And the political responsibility of every citizen comes from their faithfulness as citizens. How can you claim citizenship if you have not been a faithful citizen? That's a question I'd like us to think about tonight. Because is it just because you say you're Dominican or you have a Dominican passport? How much of these people who claim to be Dominican citizens overseas have American passports, have pledged allegiance after 5 years to the American flag and the American coat of arms and the American, how much of these people, right, are faithful to Dominica when they have pledged allegiance to another country? Where is the faithfulness there? And that is where the ethics and the morality comes in and the responsibility of the citizen. So we have to question the faithfulness of citizens. Can these people be considered as faithful to Dominica, okay, as people who have stayed in Dominica and take the guaye and the hard time and the political oppression and the political suppression? That doesn't diminish the fact that they are culturally, historically tied to Dominica. You cannot take that away from them. Their cultural and historical ties is totally different from their indigenous continuous association in Dominica. And here goes the challenge that we have to pose for people in public life. That the formation of our conscience and the moral responsibility of the formation of conscience calls us to evaluate the policy, the positions, and the party platforms and the candidates who are in our elections. So each individual, in closing, I think, has a responsibility to make changes and choices in political life in light of properly formed consciences, and participate that and a participation that goes well beyond casting a vote. It's more than just casting a vote. When you cast a vote, do you pay taxes? Even if you send a barrel and money in Western Union, what is your gross contribution to the participation of the life of the country in which you have voted? What kind of formation of conscience and moral and ethical dimension is there? How faithful are you when you come into a country the night before, vote, and leave the next day? Our conscience must speak to that. Our faithfulness as citizens must come into question. I just give you an example. There are 11 people in my family. I have 7 sisters overseas, and they have all told me they're not in, and their names are on the list. Right? Just allow me to end with 3 stirring examples tonight. And all of them have said they're not interested in coming back to Dominica to vote. They're not interested in Dominica because of the fact that and all of them, all my sister's children throughout high school and college, they have brought them to Dominica for every major festivity that there is. All their high school and college papers were always on Dominica. None of my nieces and nephews have done any research anywhere except about Dominica. Throughout their time living in Dominica, I've been involved in the life of doing research for them, documentation for them, but they have no interest. And they will not vote in there because as far as they are concerned, it is immoral and unfaithful to come to vote in a country when they do contribute. My family gives scholarships in Calibishi, both in the name of my mother and my father. Okay? We have regular annual contributions, not only to Calibishi, but to other organizations in Dominica. But that doesn't give them, their conscience tells them that is the matter thing. So it has to involve not only, it goes beyond casting a vote. You cast a vote and then what? You have the entitlement to cast a vote and then what? So I think I see my role here tonight as appealing to the conscience of people. Are you doing the right thing? What are your moral imperatives? What is your ethical thought process that you think that because you are a citizen of a country, you can throw aside your conscience, you can delegitimize the process of election, you can throw away ethical and moral principles, pretend, lie, show up, misrepresent, do all those kind of things, and then return. So I think that is what I think we need to look at tonight, and we need to think very closely as we continue to think. In closing, let me say I think the consultation is a good thing. The process, to my mind, is lacking in many areas. For once, we can say we are grateful that at least people are coming together to talk. We have been talking separate and apart. Now, at least we have the decent thing of people coming together in a common space and share their ideas where people can be listened to, where people can articulate their views, where one side can hear the side of the other and those things. That is good. That is, to my mind, a very humanistic perspective. We have reached that far. We have reached that far where at least we know we have finally observers who can come to Dominica and be fed with in-depth knowledge from people on both sides, and they can see for themselves. I will say, one of the things I've come to realize, especially after watching Portsmouth tonight, I think a lot of these observers are stunned by the caliber and the standard of some of the contributors who speak at those forums. And I think, in all fairness, I think they're putting their prime minister in a very bad light. I think they are shaming his credibility. I think they are belittling his estimation. Because there's a saying that goes, a leader is defined by the people who follow. And if this is what we are seeing, the quality and the caliber and the not to, they have to realize that they are doing him an injustice. They are doing him a disfavor in the eyes of international people, because one of the given takeaways, I'm sure, is people must be saying, like, really? These are the people? And these are questions that have to be asked. So this is my opening thing. I just want to look at that, and I think I want to focus on conscience, faithfulness, morality, and the ethical dimension of the voters in the electoral process.
No, and Simeon, I think we're going to get back to that, because obviously, once we start relating that now to the actions that we see are taking place on the ground, when we start relating that business of conscience, not only in terms of people who are coming down, who are not familiar with the processes in Dominica, who have absolutely no concern about what programs, what policies, what strategies, what are the philosophies of the party.
Exactly.
It's only driven by a ticket, because
they're not even involved in the campaign process.
No, because
they're not even involved in the exchange of what is happening. So they vote without information.
Right.
They vote without being, because to vote, voting is a participatory exercise. That is why I insist it is not only just casting a vote. Because, there are some countries in the world that allow 16-year-olds. There are 9 countries in the world that allow 16-year-olds to vote, And there are about 7 countries in the world where voting is obligatory. You can be how you call it now, you can be fined for not voting. So it's not just voting, and there are people who vote against their conscience.
Yeah.
They vote out of fear. Because they know they don't vote, they can be arrested.
Let's go to Marceline a little bit, because Marceline, Simeon raised some points here, but I think you need to follow up on. Maybe Alvin will do the same as well. This whole question of allegiance, you would know the process very well. When you go to a country and you spend whatever 5 years, 6 years after you become resident, and then you become a naturalized citizen, and then you have to go and swear your allegiance to that country. You swear on a Bible or something, you raise your hand, and a judge or somebody makes you swear. This is a real thing. You swear allegiance to that country. So in fact, you're giving up, to a large extent, the allegiance you had to another country, and you swear into this one. It's like Tina Turner. Tina said she gave up American citizenship because there was too much tax on an American. She went to live in France or somewhere, in Nice, in the south of France or somewhere. The fact of the matter is, Marceline, you were online. You were ready to make a major contribution, but you didn't get the opportunity. There are many, many other people who did not get that opportunity. So when we talk about disenfranchising people, what do we really mean? When you have a consultation and you only allow 2 or 3 people, or 4 or 5 or dozen people in the diaspora to speak, is that really enfranchising anybody? When you buy tickets, out of, let's say, 150,000 Dominicans overseas, you purchase tickets for 2,000 of them to come to Dominica. How are you enfranchising the other 148,000 people who did not get a ticket? What sense does that make? So this business about disenfranchising people, I'm not sure I understand it. Maybe you might be able to explain it to us a little better, Marceline.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gregoire, for having me this evening. And it's good to be here with the rest of your panel. Simeon made some he raised some very salient points, and some of which I would like to touch on. I want to say good evening to Judge Andre. He too touched on some salient points as well. And everyone linked to the Q95 radio station, be it by Facebook Live. I want to say a special good evening to you all. Good evening to Lambi and what's his name? the other guy who sits behind the
Sure.
panel,
Sure.
Sherwin. I want to say good evening. Well, Mr. Mr. G, that it was grueling having sit at the diasporan consultation with Francine Barron and the rest, and listening to so much reasons as to why Dominicans should go home to vote. And I had my very salient points waiting to be to address, and I wasn't called, so I am grateful you called me, and you gave me the opportunity tonight. But I really wanted to make those points in the presence of the observers mission in Dominica. But again, I was disenfranchised, and uh, I don't know how many people got disenfranchised, but I know it's quite a number of persons who did. So, as it pertains to the Byron report, I will use myself as a case study because I am a Dominican diasporan and I have been living here in the US for the past 19 years, almost 20 years. And for the record, I will say my name is Marcelin Edwards. I am a Dominican diasporan living in the state of New Jersey. I am also a citizen of the United States of America, which is my adopted country, where I have been residing, as I said, for the past 19 years, since I emigrated from Dominica on my own volition. I decided to take up residence, work, and raise my family for reasons of better opportunities, etc., here in the US. Now, this is the country where I, like many Dominicans or Dominican diasporan, decided to become citizens. I decided to become a citizen. I took a sovereign oath to the United States of America. As I said, like all the other Dominican diasporans who are citizens of the United States of America, and I took it to renounce my country of birth, and it even goes further than that, Simeon. It says you have to renounce your country and even take up arms against your country. That is my country of birth at some point in the future, if the United States of America and my homeland Dominica wind up in a conflict. And of course, I hope this never happens. But that's the oath we took when we became American citizens. This is the country where I, like many Dominican diasporans, we work, pay taxes, we enjoy the services of a proper and efficient healthcare system. We enjoy the security and democracy of this country. We enjoy the availability of jobs, a fair wage pay for fair day's pay, and promotions based on meritocracy. We enjoy a decent and healthy democratic system of governance, and we have the privilege to vote where we live in this great USA, with my full voting rights, our full voting rights protected under the Constitution, as well as the conditions that qualify me to vote, not on bribes, as Simeon said, but on knowledge of the real issues publicly debated by the political parties. It is much practical to choose the people or political party that best represents me, my ideas, and my interest. And in so doing, because I know of these issues, my ideals, I vote based on my beliefs. And those ideals are supported by the leaders I choose to elect, because that is where I am domiciled. While I understand that voting is one of the most important rights, I also understand that it is a democratic process that has to be free and fair. And in my understanding, a free and fair election involves political freedoms and fair processes leading up to the vote. A fair count of eligible voters who cast a ballot, not two ballots, but one ballot. And of course, including such aspects as election fraud or voter suppression all that is included in free and fair elections. And of course, the acceptance of the election results by all parties. By that definition of free and fair elections, it seems that the very Constitution is now being weaponized against free and fair elections in Dominica by that $650,000+ of Justice Byron and Roosevelt Skerrit Diabasak. What they're presenting to us is a Diabasak. The report of Justin Byron is equal to a devil in a bar that is pregnant with little demons. And that is the reason why everyone who walked into the consultation should have stood up and collectively asked Roosevelt Skerrit for his resignation in the presence of the observer's mission. They should have done that and demand that Justice Byron refund the taxpayers of the country every damn cent that was paid to him, because that is not what Dominicans ask for. Dominicans ask for a very simple process, mainly to cleanse the voters list, the issuance of voters' ID cards, equal access to state-owned radio stations, and of course, campaign finance reform, all of which should guarantee a fair democratic process to accurately express the accurate results expressed by the voters at the polls. Electoral reform, to me, that electoral reform is for the Dominican people who are governed by the government they elect. The people did not ask to legitimize the stealing of the elections with imported votes. For example, in the elections before the sham elections, there were about 15 planes on the tarmac at the Melvin Hall Airport with hundreds of overseas voters brought in. That in itself is a total disenfranchisement of our Constitution. It is a total disenfranchisement of the legitimate votes in Dominica, and not the diasporan votes, because Dominicans living in Dominica should be the ones to decide who governs them, and as a result, there are laws which are stipulated in the Constitution governing their rights, which should protect them against people like all the sabotagers who systematically disenfranchise the Dominican people. The people did not ask Justice Byron to take them back to slavery. The Dominicans are disenfranchised in having to bury their children for the simplest of reasons. Dominicans are disenfranchised by not having jobs to take care of their needs and that of their children. Dominicans living in Dominica are disenfranchised by being afraid to check in at the hospital. This is what I consider to be disenfranchisement. They are disenfranchised by losing their businesses and becoming second-class citizens in their own country. Dominicans at home are disenfranchised by outsourcing all their jobs to foreigners and the millions of dollars exported to other countries. The legitimate votes of Dominicans living at home who must deal with the economic demise they live in day in and day out. Those are the people who are disenfranchised. It's not us who are being disenfranchised, because we don't have to deal with the high rate of unemployment that go hand in hand with poor health and the lack of proper health care and other services that government has an obligation to provide for its citizens. And in terms of Dominicans living abroad and talking about the disenfranchisement, or we are disenfranchised, we should be able to vote in Dominica. I cannot say that the Dominican diasporans feel disenfranchised and must vote in the elections in Dominica, because this in itself does not make any sense. And I took some notes about the things that happened during the mobilization of Dominicans going home to vote, because I have seen firsthand how the mobilizing of the Dominican diasporan voters is done. And I must say it is done in the most unconscionable manner. It is done in the most unpatriotic manner. It is not for the interest of our country. It is not for the interest of Dominicans, but it is solely for the interest of all of the diasporans here and their selfish agendas. For example, the people mobilizing those votes, you call them the agents, those who normally mobilize to give Dominicans the free tickets and whatever comes with the free tickets, whatever they ask for, pocket change to go home to see their families after years of not being able to pay their own airfares to go to Dominica. And while all of that is simultaneously done, they cast a vote in while they're on the ground in Dominica as a way to say thank you. And with the most needed resources of our land being paid out in brown paper bags. It is being paid, state funds are being paid in brown paper bags to the agents who mobilize those votes. There are people who got in the excess of $10,000 in brown paper bags just for bringing home diasporans to vote in Dominica, those agents. So if this is not bribery, why do you have to pay the agents who mobilize the voters to go home to vote in Dominica? And it's not only paying them in $10,000, hundreds of dollars in those brown paper bags. Some of them get kickbacks, like trips to go to Dubai and China. And all of those things are taking place while Dominicans are sucking salt. So if we have proper reforms in Dominica, then all of that would not have been. All of that would have just cut off right there and then. And it's the reasons why we must see to it that those are the reasons why we must see to it that proper reform is done and not the diabasak they're bringing to us. And we should really understand that this is the same man who brought the RSS to Dominica during our elections to shoot and take us Dominicans who weren't in agreement for the hundreds of diasporans to flood the voting system and change the results. So this man has demonstrated that he has no moral authority to approve and deliver anything reform-wise. And that's the reason why we have to stand up and say no. That is the reason that we have to stand, we have to march, we have to say no, because we are not going to get any form of meaningful reform in Dominica. In the first place, this is a man who told us that there's no law and no constitution that can stop him. So if this man deliberately breaks the constitution, deliberately and knowingly breaks the constitution all the time, then how do we expect this man to bring reform on the table for the benefit of the Dominican people? And I would like to digress for a minute, to refer to the comments.
But I will want to bring in Alvin shortly, Maslin.
Yes, yes, good. I want to digress for a minute.
Yeah.
I'll be short on some of the comments that I heard that voting is not hinged on paying taxes, and there are some people residing in Dominica who vote and not pay taxes. I strongly disagree, because whether you're a homemaker or probably jobless and just sitting on the block smoking your 3 trees that was approved, you must eat to survive. And therefore, every food item purchased at the grocery store has VAT taxes calculated and factored in the price. So that means everyone is contributing to the tax system in the country, whether they're gainfully employed or not. And one of the things I want to say on the record here tonight is that the diasporans who strongly feels that they should go home to vote in Dominica, I think if we are modernizing electoral reform, the government needs to come up with a way as to how to tax these diasporans, to let them pay their fair taxes, let them contribute to real taxation in Dominica. It's either you tax their earnings or you tax their savings, because you cannot be contributing systematically to a government, elect a government on the backs of the people, and leave Dominica in the state of deprivation. It is not correct. And those are the reasons why we should all come together and chant it down. We should say no to this diabasak this man is bringing. And now I understand why he could not bring it into Marigot and Concord and Wesley and Woodford Hill and Calibishi. He was specific in the areas he chose to bring that type of consultation, because he knew that in those areas he can't fool anybody there. The people would not accept it. So no wonder he went to the strongholds where he feels that he has the power that he can do that.
Yeah.
And I want to pause here.
No, Marcelin, thank you so much for that. Then this thing is sometimes gets a little worrying, when you think about some of these states. Like, like Simeon said, he listened to what happened in Portsmouth tonight, and I listened to some of it. It's unbelievable. I mean, when I listened to some of what was being said, the reasons why you should not have electoral reform and you should not clean the voters list, you mustn't. Some of them they just don't sound right. Now, Alvin, let's talk about some real issues here because you're a man who has a lot of experience in Dominica and where you are as well. This disenfranchisement, Alvin. Now, when people are not given tickets to go to Dominica to vote, how many people really go down to vote unless they're given a free ticket? How many? I really don't know. There's many people live in America to go down to vote, or Canada to go down to vote in Dominica unless they get a free ticket. Not many. People usually go down sometimes for carnival or for Creole festival and stuff, but nobody really says I'm going to take my vacation and pay a ticket and go to Dominica around the time so that I can vote. Very few people say that. And secondly, Alvin, I mean, you're knowledgeable about the travel business. If you think about 2,000 people by 2,000 US dollars per person, that's for tickets and, out of pocket and so on, accommodation and, I mean, that's a lot of money. That's what, isn't that around $4 million, something like that? That's a lot of money, 4 million US dollars. So you explain to me how that the political party that is not even known to be raising any funds at all, where do you find 4 million US dollars to bring people to vote down there? Right? So this whole business of enfranchising and not disenfranchising, we need to look at that more seriously.
Well, Mr. G, thank you again for inviting me to this evening's program. And let me say a pleasant good evening to my friend Simeon. We go way, way, way back, and Maslin and Dr. Andre, who was with us earlier, and my boy Lambi. Lambi and I go way back too, boy. It's too long to remember and show it. But Mr. G, I know you asked the question, but I want to respond in a different way, if you don't mind. And let us understand where we are right now. And in terms of where we are, I'm going to paint two scenarios. The consultation is going on, and I too have concerns with the consultation. And the question that you asked about the disenfranchised and the payments and all of that, I think Dr. Andre and other guests on your program have spoken eloquently on that and point out the dishonesty and the discredibility and all of that, even tonight in Dr. Andre opening comments. But let me give a scenario. Two things is going to happen. One, Roosevelt Security is going to present some sort of draft legislation to the parliament, or and based on that draft legislation, it may or may not go through, or you may have a situation as obtained in 2017 when he attempted to push through some legislation to legitimize bribery, and the people stood up and the draft was withdrawn. We are at the point now where, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to speak at the consultation and to primarily address the observers. At this point, we cannot, how should I put it? We cannot not pay emphasis on them. And here's why I'm saying that. Over the last 13 or more years, the Prime Minister have discarded every report, everyone. He has thrown it aside. The only one that it appears, and I will use the word appears very cautiously, that he's seeking to look at is the Byron's report. Mr. G, bear with me for a little while. Just about 8 months ago, in December of 2022, we had a general election. And the OAS issued a report. The OAS issued a report as observers. And in the findings and recommendations of that report on page 8, I'm going to reference what the OAS had to say. And it's important because, as I said, at this point where we are now, I'm speaking directly to the observers, and I would hope that I'm sure they may listen to your program or they may get excerpts from the program, and all this other red herrings that's coming about in the persons of the quote unquote Father Eustace and whoever. These are red herrings. I think they're not. I don't think they're being listened to. They're being maybe heard. There's a difference between hearing and listening. Here's what the OAS said. The OAS has observed general election in Dominica since 2009. 2009, and they were observing in 2022. That is 13 years of observer. 13 years. The 2022 mission is the fourth to date, fourth mission. So meaning that they have been in 4 election cycles within a period. And each mission has offered a series of recommendations on how Dominica might address key issues related to its electoral framework and processes. In many cases, recommendations have been restated by successive missions. And I hope they're listening, because I'm addressing them tonight. I'm not addressing anyone else. In its discussion with Dominica's electoral and other authorities, the 2002 mission confirmed that there has been little to no progress, either legislatively or administratively, on any of the more than 50 recommendations presented to Dominica since 2009. You hear that number? 50 recommendations. I know you had a list, and your list may have had as many as that as well, and others, but the OAS says more than 50 recommendations. As a result, several stakeholders with whom the mission met questioned the usefulness of the organization's continued engagement and the issuing of new recommendations. You hear what the OAS is saying? I'm addressing the OAS tonight and the mission and those listening from CARICOM, the OAS, and the Commonwealth. OAS electoral observation missions and the recommendation that they offer seek to assist member states in strengthening their electoral systems and processes. The OAS mission to the 2019 general election had commended its findings and recommendation to the reform process led by Commissioner Byron. It is the organization's hope that those prove useful in the initial stages of the reform exercise. So they're saying that they gave Byron some of those recommendations, and they're hoping that Byron will take them on board. While the 2022 mission recognizes that the process to modernize Dominica's electoral framework is now at an advanced stage, it nevertheless wishes to offer the following preliminary findings and recommendations for consideration as the process proceeds towards conclusion. And finally, it says there, these recommendations, for the most part, reiterate and seeks to enhance those offered by previous OAS electoral observers' mission. They are based on the mission's further analysis of the electoral system, the information it gathered through discussions. Yeah, that's important. Through discussions with national and electoral authorities. So they were not just saying that on the top of their head. Political parties and civil society prior to the elections and its observation on election day. So the OAS is saying we didn't just come up with that. We spoke with the electoral authorities, we spoke with political parties, we speak with civil societies, we have given more than 50 recommendations. And among the areas that they recommend, and we may not have time to go into all of that tonight, voters ID, that was in the 2022. Electoral registry, that was in the 2022. Campaign of political finance, that was in the 2022. Electoral technology, what we are talking tonight about virtual and all that good stuff, that's in the report. Electoral boundaries, that's in the report. Electoral justice, meaning that what kind of time frame for putting forward petitions and how they should be looked at in a timely manner, that's in the recommendation. Political participation of women, that's in the report. So the point I want to make, Mr. G, is that if I may just segue a bit now to the Constitution. Section 38 of the Constitution is quite clear. As a matter of fact, Mr. Jim spoke eloquently to that last night. I don't want to go into that, but Section 38 is there and it's worth noting. Section 51 of the Constitution is also worth noting. Speaks about scrutiny of electoral legislation. So, notwithstanding all what we may have observed now in terms of the consultation and its format that is taken, at some point, before this draft legislation are presented to the Parliament, it must, it shall, it has to go to the Commission. So it'll be interesting to see what's contained in there. And finally, Section 5611 of the Constitution refers. And that particular section is worth noting, because even when the question of that famous email that we spoke about of 2008, Section 5611 of the Constitution reads, in the exercise of its function under this Constitution, a commission shall not, I repeat the word, shall not be subject to the direction or control of any other person or authority. So what that is saying is that if that 2008 email that said there's madness going in the commission, when the commission was undertaking its work, that is contravened to the Constitution. And that could have been challenged. And that is the point I've made in so many forums. We got to, Mr. G, we got to put this matter before the court. We got to find ways and walk and chew gum. We got to.
But Alvin, you know, any citizen can do that, you know.
Exactly. I agree. And we got to do that. We got to walk and chew gum, because the CCJ, when they issued the report in July, gave us that opening. They gave us that opening and nobody took that invitation. So as I'm saying, my focus is really to the observers. And it is my hope that given their involvement over the last 13 or more years, given the more than 50 recommendations that they have put, given the question of voters' ID, which is what they have articulated quite eloquently in their report, and bear in mind, 8 months ago, Byron work was still going, so that runs concurrently with whatever the OAS presented. The Byron's recommendation or his draft legislation may not coincide, and in a lot of cases, if you read the report side by side with what the OAS have, but that clearly is where we have to go, because all of this other influences that we might try to change the hearts of minds of the Eustace Thomases and the Pastor Benjis and all these folks who just come and speak not even knowledgeable. I heard last night somebody talk about voters ID, or you can vote with your passport. And I mean, this, I don't even want to respond to that, because clearly Antigua, St. Lucia, Grenada, all of those islands have voter ID. And it tells you clearly what should be on these IDs. My God, what are we different? Are we from Mars? Residency, that's another issue.
You know the problem, Simeon? You know the problem, Alvin?
I'm sorry?
You know what the problem is? The problem is, if you listen to Simeon said, it has to come down to conscience. Because if you listen to what took place in Portsmouth tonight, or some of the nights of people making the statements that they're making, there's no conscience there. They're not thinking. There's no thought. There's no logical thought process.
And I take that. I accept that.
So what you might find is that the observers might make the same recommendations, but the people that you're listening to at Portsmouth tonight, they're not interested in all that.
So remember, I said in 2017, the government attempted to pass a legislation to legitimize bribery. And you know what happened. We don't want to go into all of the details, but we know what happened. The law was withdrawn. I'm saying it comes to that crunch time now. that whatever goes in that draft legislation that has to go first, as I said, to the commission and then to the parliament, the people must be ready to exercise that same force that they did back in 2017 when the government attempted to legitimize and to legislate bribery, and it was defeated. That same effort has to go, and that begins tomorrow. That begins tomorrow with the match. That begins tomorrow with the rally. It has to be sustained. It cannot be a two-show, two-flam or one day. It has to be sustained. And even if tomorrow the results may not as we would all like it, let's go back. That's how it happens. That's how movements develop and grow. Let's go back on Thursday. Let's go back on Friday. Let's go back on Monday. As a matter of fact, we should be engaging in some form of protest and rally throughout the entire duration of that consultation.
Yes.
It shouldn't be a question where we just do a one thing. That should be run concurrently with the consultation. And let's not be defeated and say, well, it's only 20 people show up or 100 persons show up. The first mile starts with the first step. So let's just be consistent. And all I'm saying is that I'm speaking to the observers. I'm hoping that what is presented will finally be presented for legislation will be what the people want.
Yes, of course. And, Simeon, if we look at this thing logically, right? I mean, what I've been saying is that ultimately it is the people's power, because the power lies in the hands of the people, really. It is the people's power that determines what politicians do, History has repeated itself on many, many occasions.
Exactly.
What is happening? See, what is happening here now? We're saying people must stake their claim, put their foot down and say, this is what we want. So we have had consultations. The OAS and some of these observer missions have made many, many recommendations, starting from, Mayor Motley and all of them made recommend. They're all there taking dust on shit. The people have to say at some point, and this may be the point at which they really need to say this, enough is enough. It is time for us to do something. And so I am very happy that people have participated in these consultations. Many organizations and individuals have made presentations, or very good presentations in some cases, proposals as to what they want in those laws and in the regulations. What has to happen? The people now have to demand that these things be implemented. They must be inserted into the draft laws and regulations. And then it must be done. And then when it's done, it must come back to a national committee of all the persons and organizations who made those contributions, so they can say, yes, I see. It is reasonable. What is here is what it represents, what we wanted in there. So now we'll review it, and then we can say, let the Electoral Commission look at it before it goes to the political directorate to be tabled in Parliament. Simeon, I am thinking myself, this is where that's a point in time that we're at. I mean, a lot of recommendations have been made. I mean, for years, so we know what it is that we really want. And so it is time to stand up and say, okay, we must have it now. All right. And then when we get it, let's look at it carefully to make sure it is everything that we want to have, regardless of what politicians are saying, because this is not about political parties, right? It is about country and people's living standards and quality of life. Simeon, your further thoughts on all of this, bearing in mind that you have said people now have to let their conscience be their guide. You cannot be politics as usual anymore.
Well, Mr. G, I would allow me to respond on two levels. Look at the consultation. Quite frankly, I will go to my grave criticizing the process. As an event practitioner, event specialist, and someone who has organized many things, let me tell you, there are certain models to a consultation. Let us use this opportunity to inform and educate and enlighten, right? There are three models to a consultation. The first model is what you call a triadic dependent consultation. The second model is something you call a collaborative dependent consultation. And the third level is what you call a collaborative interdependent consultation. My question is, what model are we using? The triadic model basically is a model that speaks to, for instance, you have a doctor who has a sick patient and he decides to consult with another doctor before he can come up as to what medical possibilities to treat that patient. Triadic 3, okay? Collaborative dependent is where you have two different sides basically discussing an issue. So you may have an engineer and an architect consulting each other as to the best approach to build a building or a bridge. So it's collaborative, professionals on both sides. Then you can have a collaborative interdependent consultation model. And this is what, to my mind, we are supposed to be having when we speak of the consultation that we are having now. Okay? And so if we are saying that we are having a consultation, Mr. Gregoire, if we are saying that we are having a consultation, if we're saying that we're having the process, the collaborative interdependent consultation, it seems to me, to my mind, that it has to have certain elements if we have to have anything from that. Okay? And normally there are five stages to a consultation process. All right? You have to meet, and where you have open-ended discussions, you have public forums where you have different processes, you have an exchange of letters and informative material, you have house meetings, you have workshops to deal with the issues that come to mind as the case may be. And then there is a process of the consultation, which has to do with where you contact people, where you discuss, as is happening now, okay, right? Then you negotiate, you take both sides, you see what side will work, what side will not work, you implement, and then you evaluate. This is what a healthy consultation is supposed to be. We do not have that. And so I will say to myself, as a professional, I will never regard this as a consultation. Mr. G, allow me to refer back to 1975 when we had the last consultation on election in Dominica. I clearly remember my father was the chief elections officer at the time. And at that time, we were introducing 18 years of voting. We were also introducing the indelible ink and a number of other measures for election. That consultation, I clearly remember, because my father would go on Saturday, Sunday afternoons, and most times it was done on Saturday afternoons. I went around with my father at the age of 11 or 12. And who were chairing these consultations? Village council chairmen, nurses in the community, prominent persons in the community. Okay? I remember when we went to Marigot, Pat Stevens was the one who chaired the consultation. Okay? At the former Marigot Primary School. So around Dominica, the consultation was chaired by people from the communities, discussing the new process for voting, the new law for voting, before that law was enacted in 1974. As a child, I was part of the process. My father would not go without he brought his wife and his younger children. So we would sit there and observe those things. And it is from that there were consultants from Jamaica and Barbados and the British Development Division, and who came to ensure that we have the law that we have now. Before it, so people gave their views. I clearly remember that. People were saying, oh, if I cannot read, if I cannot write, what is going to happen to me? Those kind of things. That's the last time I remember. But it was not consultation led by anybody from the Labour Party government. Okay? There were people from the different communities, leaders in the community, who were chairing those community events. I remember when we went to Calibishi, there was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Nibs Alexander, who was the chairman of the village council at the time, the grandfather of Alex Bruno, a farmer who was the chairperson of the consultation at the time in the Calibishi community. I clearly remember that. In Woodford it was B.A. Carbon, okay, who was a staunch freedomite at the time. So what I'm saying is that, I mean, this is just a little historical perspective that I would like to give in terms of as that is concerned. No, when we speak of the consultation and where we're going to go with it, I think we are at the cusp of determining how we need to go about getting the people involved. Let us look at two things. One, if you look at the number of people who are tuned in to GIS on any of those consultations, it has not reached 150. Throughout the consultations of the 60-something people who live in Dominica, who log in on GIS to watch the consultation, it has not reached 150. Let us look at the consultations that are happening around Dominica. The consultation, I know for some of the people last week, people were invited to the State House on the one on Thursday, and I heard half of the guests did not show up. And there was a list of names of people who were invited. And when some people tried to enter the State House, they were told their names are not on the list. I have been reliably informed, because I've been told by a very good friend of mine, that the consultations in Portsmouth and Granby, people are being selected. People are being told what to write. And when I look at Portsmouth tonight, there was a young lady who spoke second, and you could see it was very clear that she was reading something that she was given to read. It's very clear. Observe the consultations. And if you notice, the people for the government have two narratives: being allowed to come to vote and voter ID cards and campaign. They are not there. None of them have touched really on any of the elements of the Byron suggestions or report. They have not even made contributions based on the presentation of the Attorney General. Now, something interesting happened tonight in Portsmouth. You can see now the government has come on the defensive, because the Attorney General tonight in his presentation was very defensive. He departed from his regular presentation in the other locations, and tonight he made a very sterling presentation or defense or proposal on elements of people of responding to what many of the people are proposing on the government side, and often and made an attempt to sort of distort what people were presenting on the non-government side of the people. So you could see that they are on defensive. Why I say we are at a cusp now, I think the opposition in Dominica is very timid. They have become too diplomatic. They have become very accommodating. And they have a bit too consensus. Okay? Yes. I think, and I quite agree with Alvin, that as these consultations are happening now, the opposition should be having their own consultations in their own constituencies. They should be having community meetings in every constituency. All the opposition candidates should be having consultations in every constituency and presenting to the people elements of the Byron report and letting them. So as the government is having their consultation, they should be having their consultation. Because it seems to me they are very accommodating I listened to the president of the United Workers' Party today talking about the march tomorrow. And I'm saying to myself, in the days of Eugenia Charles, you think the police in Dominica or Charles Savre could ever tell the police in Dominica could ever tell Charles Savre and Eugenia Charles when to have their meeting in Lago, where to march, where to assemble, and those kind of things there?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They would challenge them.
Yes.
And so that is how Ms. Charles was able, and I think the Freedom Party was able to agitate the people. There's no doubt about it. The narrative was all about agitation. People may not agree with me, and that is how it could culminate to the culmination that they had. That's what these people are fearful of. That's why we're at a cusp. Because the minute, anytime they hear meeting, they hear demonstration, they frighten. The whole army comes out. They put the RSS on standby. They make all kind of things only because people are expressing their rights. Look at what is happening with GIS now. Every negative criticism of the consultation is put down by GIS. I did something today. I did some research, and I think we need to report the GIS because it is a breach of Chapter 1 of the Constitution that people's views are silenced. And so there is a, and I think it's deliberate. And I think the names of the people of GIS, whom I know, should go into a report to international organizations, the International Court of Justice, the United Nations, and people like that, and document what is happening now with the consultation. Because here we have a consultation taking place. Here we have a consultation taking place, okay? Where it is for everybody. You have people on the government side. I've seen people and I've been monitoring, making all kind of dirty, derogative, insultive comments to the opposition people when they're, and it's not taken down. Yet when people who don't support the government make their comments, they are taken down and they are removed. So Mr. CG and Mr. DT on GIS and Mr. B, whatever, R, and whoever the other people who are on JIS need to be mindful that they are committing an international violation against human rights in the interest of the freedom of expression of people. And somebody needs to take this up at a higher level and make a complaint. Let it be registered in some international community. And they need to be put on the alert for that. It must be done. Because you cannot tell me you are denying people the right to speak at a national consultation on a national media station. That is wrong. Okay? And that is trampling on the rights of people's freedom of expression. I had the opportunity to bring it to somebody's attention last night. The person tell me, well, you know so and so. That cannot be a given. That cannot be a given. That's not acceptable. Okay? And so that is it. But coming back to the opposition and Dominic, I find our opposition has become very accommodating. Yes. I think we have become, the fact about it is that we have to learn to shame wrong. We have to learn to be non-entertaining of injustice. We have to learn to be, distant from people who are involved in trying to deny citizens their rights. We have to be able to do that. And I think the time is near when people need to be, you don't have to agitate people, but you have to speak in such a way that you appeal to not only the intellect of people, but the reasoned emotions of people. I say reasoned emotions of people, so that you can evoke a sense of anger against injustice, against mistreatment of others, against people who are trampled upon. And let people who are engaged in the process know that as a Christian, as a citizen, as someone who is involved, I will not stand for that. And this is not tolerable to me. So I think it's quite fitting. I like what Alvin said. There has to be some mirror activity on the part of the opposition as they seek to work on. They must also demand the hearing by the observers of certain people in Dominica, because you cannot tell me the observers, they are living out three of the biggest constituencies in Dominica: Marigot, Salisbury, and Roseau North. They are going to the parish hall, I heard, right? But I understood people are being called and negotiated to bus in. When you see tonight in Portsmouth, half of the people are in a red shirt at a national consultation on electoral reform. They don't have the decency of mind and the sense of presence to say, okay, let us appear to be apolitical or non-political at an event like this. And so we need to assume a posture of not necessarily violent confrontation, but reasoned confrontation, where the message must be that we're not accommodating. We don't want to be accommodating anymore. While we are opposed to what is happening, but we cannot be continuing the process of wanting to be bedfellows with people. And there must be some distance. There must be some, while not necessarily, there mustn't be a schism, but there must be a distance. There mustn't be hatred, but there must be a certain level of stepping back. And there mustn't be necessarily animosity, but there must be a posture of non-inclusion, so that the message is clear that we don't support that. We're not going to stand with you and smile with you and laugh with you and be accommodating when you're doing nonsense in the country. I think that is my position on the matter.
Well, yes, and it's a good position to take. And we come to this point in time, really. We've been saying so in different ways for quite some time now. There has to come a point when the people have to realize that they're the ones who really have the power. And you cannot be having all this recommendation and making all these demands and they're not being met and you don't do anything about it. You are the people and the Constitution recognizes we the people. So the power lies in the hands of the people. As we come down, as we wind down, because you can see the 10 o'clock hour is already on us. Maslin, I wanted to go to you so you can give us your sort of final remarks as we do that. Because clearly what we want to see going forward, what do we want to see in terms of there is this what is being called as a consultation. Most people do not agree it is being done in a very transparent way. It's not being done in a fair way. I mean, obviously, it should have been chaired and moderated by the chief elections officer. To me, this is where it should have been in the first place. And I find that the observers should have been playing a more meaningful role in exchanging and hearing the dialogue and, really getting into the thing with the people so they can hear the people and sort of feedback to it. But instead of that, we had the moderator making comments on people's inputs. So I wanted to, your thoughts on where do we go from here, Master? Because we don't have too much time.
Okay, well, in the first place, Francine Barron should not have been the moderator on this very important subject because I have seen Francine Barron in action in a meeting in Washington, D.C., when she gave myriads of reasons as to why Dominica does not need electoral reform. And she actually just insulted the OAS and the other missions by letting them know that Dominica was a sovereign country and Dominica could take care of its own business. It is very troubling to see people like Francine Barron on as the chairperson, and this just tells us where that consultation is going. And of course, there are no signs of the commissioners or anybody representing the electoral mission. I have no reasons, I have no idea why that is the case, but I can tell that we are not going to get anything positive that is going to work for the Dominican people.
And you may want to mute your mic.
At one point in time, I thought that
Mic is not muted.
At one point I thought that the Constitution of Dominica protected the Dominicans living in Dominica. But now I have to ask, who does the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Dominica protect? Is it the Dominican voter living in Dominica or the Dominica diasporan voter who is also a US citizen and living and working abroad? I don't think when they wrote the Constitution, it was to protect the Dominica diasporan American living in an adopted country. So going forward, I would like to give a word of caution to our Dominican diasporan brothers and sisters who are my neighbors. I wish that they would activate their conscience. Look at the state of Dominica. When they go to Dominica, look at Dominicans. Wow. Look at how they live. Look at the cost of living, the rising cost of living. Look at the things that they need and they must do without. Look at the crime rate in Dominica. Look at the level of unemployment there is in Dominica. The young people who are just overwhelmed with nothing to do. They have no future in Dominica. Listen to how the cries of the Dominican people. Listen to your children. You expect your children to do well because you live abroad and you expect the best for your children. In so doing, the Dominican people deserve the best as well for their children. And if we continuously go home to vote in an election where we have no right to vote, because most of us are voting illegally, most of them, because I have no intentions to go home and vote in Dominica, because if my name is on the list, it should be removed from that list, because I think I do not qualify given the 5-year period by which the names are supposed to be removed. And I know many diasporans, Dominica diasporans, whose names should not be on the list because some of them are here for over 20, 25 years. When they got the documents and went home, and I know that they voted in elections in Dominica after being out of Dominica for so long. So you are not really the one being disenfranchised because you have the opportunity to vote in your adopted country. Let us let the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Dominica work for the people who must live under the government that you chose to elect for them. Let them make those choices. Let's not disenfranchise the Dominicans living in Dominica, because truly they are the ones being disenfranchised. They feel disenfranchised because they feel they do not have an opportunity for them to elect a government for themselves. They would like to do so. Your investments in Dominica, your 2 barrels per year, the little change that you send home for your families through the Western Union and MoneyGram, it does not give you the right to go home and elect a government on their backs and leave. Those are the reasons why you are sending home those barrels and the monies through Western Union in the first place, because they cannot do it. The economy is not accommodating to them because you have taken away their economy. You have killed the future. Let Dominicans live, and let us put our consciences to work. Those of us who received the $10,000, that is the Dominicans' money that you received. The village council clerks, some of them who received the $5,000 when they went into Roseau, and they got the call from the PM to come to my office and to, and when they were given, monies in an envelope, here's something to pay your passage to go back to the country. When they opened the envelope, $5,000. Why would you give a village council clerk? Why would you give a polling clerk $5,000 in an envelope? So those are the reasons that we know that corruption is going on, even in the Constitution. We should allow the voting process to be free and fair by helping to remove our names on that list, because we know well we do not have the interest of the Dominican people and the country at heart. And I pray that when the curtains come down, Dominicans will be able to vote with a process that is free and fair, and is going to do right by them and their children and the country. And this is what I have to say tonight.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
God bless us as a people.
Yes, Alvin.
And thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. You're welcome. You're welcome anytime, Marceline. But yes. Alvin, when we talk about the disenfranchisement thing as we wrap, right? When we think about the major projects that are taking place in Dominica and the local contractors are not engaged, we think about the fact that a lot of imported labor is coming in, to the extent that the Prime Minister says we repatriated $214 million out of maybe a possible $350 million that was earned income, because those people who repatriate that money, they have to live, so they have to eat something and use something in there for them to live. So when you think about that, it means aren't our local people being disenfranchised already just by the foreign firms and people coming in and taking over their jobs and their incomes? And the local small business being disenfranchised when they can no longer afford to pay the rent for building because the Chinese have so increased or put up the rent so high that Dominicans cannot afford to rent places anymore. The local businesses are closing down. And they're being disenfranchised when some of the small businesses that used to be nice shops are now on the tents on the sidewalk over the drains. Is that how we enfranchise our people? So it seems to me that this whole thing about enfranchisement and disenfranchisement, charity begins at home. And to tell me that the people who have run away because they could not make it, right? And every day they were trying their best to get out because it wasn't working. And you're trying to tell those people that things are so good that they must come back and put you into office, come back and give me a vote for that one, then go back. Alvin, your thoughts on some of this as we wrap?
Well, Mr. G, again, let me just say in 3 words, in light of what you said, and I think I agree with Simeon. We at crunch time, and we must set the narrative. We must not base what we do on what they say and all these terms and disenfranchise and all of that. I'll say in 3 words, elections have consequences. I've said that several times before. Elections have consequences. And those consequences can be either good or bad. And as we've seen it, we've had bad consequences over the years. And we're at crunch time now. And it's time now to roll our sleeves up. All of those folks who are back home that you just mentioned, the bus drivers, the truck operators, the taximen, the farmer, the school teacher, you name it. It's time to roll your sleeves up and realize it's crunch time now. All of this, I don't want to put it in a way like to say all of this, to downgrade the talk. But all of this talk now is we are we've gone past that, if one might say. I refer to all the recommendations and what the OAS have presented before. And I think now it's time for action. And I think that first time of action starts tomorrow, as I understand it. And we have to sustain it. Let me just say briefly 2 things. One, when the CCJ issued their report, one specific area that they mentioned forcefully in their report had to do with the electors registry, the electors list. And if I recall carefully, they said if nothing else is done, assuming that nothing else is done as far as the reform, that matter has to be looked into. Because you know why? The list is the central theme of an election, your electors list. That's the crux of the matter. And that also is tied in with the whole question of residency. So you see the connection there. And then voters ID. I happen to have a copy of what the list looks like in terms of how it is, because you hear folks saying the question of whether they should use passports and all that kind of stuff. The list is categorized as follows: your last name, your first name, your middle name, your address, your occupation, your district, meaning the polling district. So for example, Lower Goodwill would be N2. And you have a unique identifier on that list. And those are the kind of information that will reflect itself on a voter's ID, along with fingerprint and your photograph and all of that good stuff. That's what obtains now. So when you hear people come at the consultation and say, well, maybe we can use a passport or maybe we can use that. No, because the list has certain specific areas as it appears. Your last name, your first name, your middle name, your address, your occupation, the district you're voting in, whether it's district N2 or district N12, the polling district, and it have what is called a registration number, which is a unique identifier. Every voter has a unique identifier. So your number might be 00125 or 00260. And then you have the other measures, which the OS mentioned in the report, incidentally, the biometrics, the fingerprint and the photograph. So what I'm saying now, we're at crunch time. The folks back home better understand that who in the kitchen fills the hit. Those diaspora and that all the way in diaspora, they're far from the kitchen. So they're not filling the hit. Who in the kitchen fills the hit. And they now must roll up their sleeve, get together, attend the rallies tomorrow, and sustain it. Let's not make it a one event thing. Let's have sustained. And as I said, if the consultation are taking place in Granby or wherever, let's have consultation, or let's have some rally, or let's have some discussion in those areas too. Let's meet the guys on the block in St. Joseph, in Granby. Let's meet the young guys on the block and have a conversation with them. We don't have to go in all of the technicalities and the nitty-gritty. Two simple things. Dude, is your name on the list? This is how we get your name on the list, and that's why your name ought to be on the list. And a voter's ID. Let's deal with that basic. Let's start from there. All this other stuff, don't confuse them more than they're already confused, because they're all confused already. So let's just start with the basic and tell them, hey, bro, you got to get ready, man. Join the rally. Let's get on board. Let's do what we got to do. And that would be my recommendation. And as I said, those of us who still may want to attend those quote unquote, if you want to use the term sham as well, consultation, let's speak to the observers. Don't speak to all of these other people coming in these echo chambers. Let's speak to the observers and let's address the observers and say, observers, you're there. And I hope you're there for a purpose. I hope you're there to help us, Dominicans. I hope you're there to help us. We're suffering. We've been hurting for the last 15 years, observers. Please help us. Make sure that those recommendations in the draft legislation reflects what we the people want, which you have said repeatedly over the last 15 years. This is what that the people of Dominica have said they want. And that would be my closing comments and my recommendation for the people of Dominica. Come out in large numbers tomorrow.
Yeah, and thanks a lot for that, Alvin. And as we speak about numbers, Simeon, in your closing remarks as you do that, Simeon, you know your mic is muted still, right? But Simeon, do you know that? Well, you might know because you're a public servant. Alvin was a public servant. Over the last 20 years or so, what would you say is the average increase that the public servants have got? I mean, is there some sense of disenfranchisement there? We know ministers have been getting decent allowances, decent increases in pay. It is more, but if you look over the last 20 years, the pay of ministers have gone up.
But not only ministers, you have certain permanent secretaries who are permanent secretaries to more than one ministry.
Right.
They are not very. There's no teacher in Dominica who will teach at 2 schools, or no nurse in Dominica who's getting 2 salaries. So it means therefore the upper echelons, and from what I understood, the head of state of Dominica is living a very indulgent lifestyle at the expense of the public purse. So my thing is, the people of Dominica, Mr. Gregoire, know they are suffering. Because let's face it, a lot of the people who support this government will tell you quietly and silently of the state of their lives and the way things are. Okay, I'm thankful that I am somebody who's very much involved in Dominican life. So I speak to people. Okay, and my involvement tells me I hear people. I have families in England and the United Kingdom who are basically economic sources for many people in Dominica, and I know that happens. And some of these people actually are supporters of the government, and I know they cannot make ends meet. They can't pay their light bill, they can't pay their water bill, they can't afford to send their children to school. Some of them, their mortgages are far behind. Okay, right? Their situation is so dire that many. Let me tell you, one of the very egregious things that has happened in Dominica now, and I keep saying, is that we have obliterated the middle class. When you look at the sustenance of Dominica in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and you know the middle class were basically the public servants and a few budding entrepreneurs. These are the people who built up Goodwill and Canefield East and Wall House and Castle Comfort, and Leopoldville. Okay, these are the people who literally did those things. And being from Calabishi, I remember certain farmers having to make 4, 5, 6 trips to Portsmouth to sell their produce, and on weekends to sell their produce to hucksters. Being able to have a van for the father, and a van, the father would pass on the old van to the son. Master, I'm sure you know that from Marigot, Wesleywood for days. I worked at 8 Bank for 2 years, and I saw farmers at one time we had to plead with farmers, don't close their loans, because they would take a loan this month and close it off next month. These things used to happen. I used to cash in checks of $30,000, $40,000 for farmers for coconuts. And when we had this citrus rehabilitation scheme, what was happening to people? I saw those things. These are things that today that cannot happen. I go to Calabishi, Westwood for dinner. I see thriving farmers sit down on the side of the road, almost coming to nothing. I go to Calabishi and I remember people who could cut style on. I remember once telling my father, why you didn't go into farming? Because the farmers in Calabishi then would be able to do things la jachèche. Today, I see some of these people, they're there, and they can't even afford to repair their houses if things happen. I have seen instances where people have died and they can't afford to bury, and these are people 20 years ago who would cut style on you in the credit union. Okay, so there is no doubt in Dominica that we have this gap of economic ability and you could say financial stability. So people know they are suffering. The teachers, the nurses, the policemen know that things are not good for them. In the process, in end tonight, what do we say? I began by talking about our conscience and faithful citizenship. And this is a question I want to ask all the people in the diaspora, Canada and England and Antigua and St. Thomas and St. Croix. Can they now go to England on their passport? The answer is yes. The average Dominican at home now cannot. The average Dominican at home now cannot travel to England on the Dominican passport. All of the diaspora Dominicans who are in St. Thomas, St. Croix, Antigua, Barbados, the United States, Canada, can fly to the United Kingdom now, even if they claim to be citizens of Dominica. That should tell them something. That should show the disparity and the inequity between just saying that you are a citizen and you're entitled to vote. Because by their very actions, while they have the advantage of being able to travel to Europe and the United Kingdom without any hassle, the average Dominican whom they have left behind cannot. And are now being denied easy access to the United Kingdom. That should tell them that their consciences should tell them that they should not go to Dominica and vote for a government that deprives its citizens the opportunity of equitable international travel. Let me give two other examples of conscience before I end. And this is a revelation I'm going to make. There's a very good relative of mine living in Antigua who has never been registered in Dominica. But I know that person has voted in Dominica twice on the name of my grandmother. That's a fact. And her ticket has been paid by the Labour Party to come to Dominica twice to vote. And I had to deal with her. I remember once leaving Rosa to go to Calabishi to vote, and I met a young man at Canefield bus stop by the Catholic Church. And I dropped him up. He said he was going to vote in the Carib territory. He said he would like a drop back down. I went to Calabishi to vote, and I picked him up at the Pegua River. He confessed to me that he voted twice in that same day, and he was a policeman.
Wow.
And he was asked to vote by his pal rep in Petit Savan and go to vote in the Carib territory because he had the same name as his grandfather.
Wow.
So conscience. When I speak about conscience, integrity, faithful citizenship, what does that say? So I think when we have to think about all those things, we have to be mindful, and really and truly, it's all about people's conscience. Are we convinced we're doing the right thing? What does our conscience say? Are we really, when we're talking about the right to vote and the need for fair and free election, whatever position we take, is it based on our conscience? You know why? Because even in those little things, we're going to have to answer to God for it. And that's how I wish to end tonight.
And yes, of course. And thank you so much for that, Simeon. And the little thing of conscience is that sometimes people have to reflect on their own lives. You have to look within sometimes, and search within yourself and ask yourself, am I better off? It's simple. Am I better off, really? I mean, why should I be kidding myself? I know I'm not better off. Why am I kidding myself? Just to say that I have allegiance to a political party. It's something that we have to grow out of. And I certainly hope that some of the discussions that we've been having, the talks that we've been exchanging with the people, Sorry that we could not take the calls tonight because this discussion was so intense. It was going so fiercely and quickly. I really could not stop it. I want to apologize to all the folks who are on Facebook and YouTube and all the persons who are listening who tried to call or wanted to call. We did not even try to get Lambi to take a few calls. I want to apologize for that. But thank you so much for tuning in to us tonight. And thank you, Marcelin, and
Yes.
Arvin, and Simeon, and Lambi, and Sherwin. Really and truly, I enjoyed this conversation tonight because I think I agree with Alvin and with Simeon that we are at a crossroads. We probably have been at this crossroads for some time now because the urgency of now is getting more urgent and it's getting more critical, more crucial because there's too much pain, there's too much suffering, all right? And it seems to be getting from bad to worse. But while the middle class is disappearing, there are select few who are getting fabulously rich. And that is a problem. We have seen that in other countries. And when that happens, you also see some strongman governments coming out. And it is not a good direction, it's not a good path for us to follow. I think Dominican, we need to change path, we need to change course, we need to reverse, go back to the intersection where we took the wrong turn and make the right turn. We need to do that. And I hope that this electoral reform process will give us an opportunity to search our consciences, as Simeon has said, and that we can take a decision, look, for ourselves, for our future, for our children's future, for the future of our.
Mr. Gregoire, just bear me two things, All the diasporans who think they have to come down to the, because they said, can you identify how many schools they have built? How many bridges they have built? How many houses they have built for Dominica? Can we identify the major projects that these Dominicans living overseas have contributed to? When you drive around Dominica, is there some major landmark that you can identify
Nothing.
that they have done to say that they're helping to build Dominica? They're building themselves. When they send back money at home to build houses for themselves, and sometimes when they come back, they don't even open up their doors to Dominicans living in Dominica. They think they have more rights than us because they have been to England and the United States. They think they have more rights than us. So when they're talking about remittances and sending things to Dominica, these are some of the major things we have to try to identify. Okay, and it's not only about voting, because people in Iran, people in Cuba, people in Russia vote. Okay? And we know fully well that it's not just voting, because many of these people vote, but the elections, they are not free and fair. So it's not just being allowed an opportunity to vote. Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is the remittances are significant, but they are not unique to Dominica only. All of the Caribbean countries, they have significant amounts of remittances going home. I mean, Jamaica, for example, probably has a percentage-wise a much more significant contribution to the GDP than we do. But the point is that all these countries like Antigua and St. Kitts, and they have remittances too, but they also have reformed the electoral process. They also have developed the ID cards. They also have cleansed the voters list. They also have ensured that they have legislation against bribery and treating. So I'm just saying this, that we're not unique. Sometimes we like to tell ourselves, oh, we are first in everything. We're the greatest. That's not really true, because if we were, we would not be running to other countries like Antigua and St. Lucia and Guadeloupe and St. Croix and Thomas and all the islands. A lot of Dominicans in the Virgin Islands and so on. We would not be doing that. We're not the greatest. I mean, we have a great country. We have a lot of natural resources, but we are not adding value to them to the extent that we can improve the lives and the living standards of our people, that they can remain at home. So we give scholarships to kids, but then when they try to come, they want to come back, but they have no jobs to come back to. How does that make us the greatest nation on earth? We can care for our own people.
But I think so. Once we start equating a barrel to a vote, we are in some terrible space.
Very much so, Mr. Thomas. Very much so, Alvin.
Once we start equating sending a barrel or two with a vote, we're in some serious space.
Okay.
Right. But did the Constitution give state laws as to how Dominicans living outside of Dominica can vote in the elections? Did it state that?
No.
Didn't it say that after 5 years your name should be removed off the list if you don't live in Dominica?
Because the electoral laws,
Electoral law.
Electoral law, but I think
Electoral laws. But
yeah.
why did it say that? Why did the
No,
electoral laws
but
say that?
Maslin, last night, Mr. James eloquently addressed that. Section 33(2)(b) of the Constitution speaks of residency or domicile.
Right.
Yes,
what
I
it says.
understand that, and that
So
was
you have to be
understand
resident in Dominica in order to, and then the other part of the legislation, like the 5 year in excess of that, kicks in. But the third thing is residency. That is why Byron was silent on that, and he's talking about absent.
That's right.
So they're trying now not to focus on residency. Let's do it absent. So it's saying, well, if you're out 90 days or 50 days, but the Constitution recognizes residency or domicile. So I think that is the kicker, and that is where the draft legislation that goes through Parliament, that wording in there, we have to watch it. We have to see what is the language that is going to say there as it relates to residency, and that we don't want anything to do with absence.
And on that note, I wanted to close up by just reminding ourselves and reminding everyone it is going to be crucial, not only for people to stand up, but for them to demand.
To be honest with you, what's happening to our Wi-Fi? Are we there?
Yes.
Mr. Gregoire,
Yes,
I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you very well, Simeon.
Everyone is there.
Yes, I'm hearing you. But
Are we there?
Yes.
You may not be hearing us. But what I was going to say in wrapping is that I think it's
something is
important.
wrong.
I think it's important for the people of Dominica.
Well, to my mind, there are two vexing issues, in all this electoral reform process. Two. And all this long talk and consultation, there are only two vexing issues. We have a bloated voters list. That's the first thing. And secondly, the fact that the list is bloated, it allows for an unfair advantage of people who may not necessarily be qualified to vote, to come home to vote. Do you know that if we just have the voters' ID card and we cleanse the list, we're good to go? We're good to go. And even if we have a voters' ID card, even if we have a voters' ID card or a national ID card, whichever card we have to ensure that the card we give people is one that prevents people from voting twice. Okay? And so therefore we could have a national ID number and a voter's ID number on the card. So if you can have two numbers on the card. Okay? And just do that. Because in 2012, the Prime Minister said that he had assigned $650,000 to start making the cards. And they said the opposition. So, okay, if the opposition wants a voter ID card, well, just put the people's voter registration number on the card. So all the people in Dominica, tell them, come and get your card. And you tell Dominicans when they come home, go to the electoral copy. That's what they do when they come for their birth paper and their passport.
And one of the things why they will not clean the voters list, the bloated list, is to enable the diasporans coming in, of course, without ID cards, for them to vote on those names that are supposed to be off the list.
And bear in mind that 2018 email, Simon talked about 2012, but we're going to go back 4 years before that. In 2008, these were the two areas,
Yeah,
that there was madness: the voters' ID and the registration list.
That's all.
The two areas.
You see, this is the problem. But I think we have a third issue now, which is that in order to fix up those two minor issues, we spent $650,000 we gave to a gentleman just to clean the voters list and to deal with that, the voters registry, and remove this element of bribery and treating.
And that $650,000 could go into recruiting about 50 young people in Dominica from the very same NEP who are computer literate and IT savvy. Give them about $10,000 each instead of giving it to a foreigner. Assign them a 2 months job and tell them, you do this. All we need is about maybe 2 people in each constituency, 2 young. If the PAL reps were smart and they had any sense of thinking, they would identify 2 of their most prominent IT and computer tech savvy people in their constituency, assign them to the culture, and take that 650,000 and put in their young people pocket. Instead, they sent it overseas. Right. All they have to do is work along with the village councils and those kind of things and do it. You don't have to give Byron 650 to come back and tell you the very same thing that you wanted to do all along.
But you see, what they want to do is not a legitimate process. What they want to do is a corrupt process to keep them in office. So that's the reason they gave this man that $650,000.
That is very foolhardy. That is very foolhardy.
I know we're going out of time.
We're under the
civilization. For the history of civilization, you have never had anybody who's been there forever. So they better get smart.
Let me just share 2 quick stuff with you. In June 23rd, 2022, Grenada had a population of 124,610. Their electors list was 87,506 when they had their elections. Antigua had the election in January 18, 2023. Their population was 93,763. Their electors list was 60,916. In December of 22, Dominica voters list was 74,800 and something. The population was 70,000.
On that note, I think we should try to wrap up now.
We wrap up already.
But really, I found the conversation was engaging, very nice, very dynamic. But let me just say this on closing. We love our diaspora people. They are relatives or friends or brothers and sisters. So we are all of us here tonight in the diaspora. It's not like we have something against. But I think Simeon is right. We must let our conscience be our guide. And I think this is what we really need to do. When we start thinking about those things, let our conscience be our guide. Because I think the vast majority, probably 90-something% of the people in the diaspora, none of them think about going home to vote in any event, but they are the very silent, vast majority. Okay, so let's just say thank you, everybody. Thank you very much, guys, for contributing so significantly here tonight. Thank you, everybody who's on Facebook and YouTube. And we'll talk another time. Take care, Lambi.
All right, Mr. J. All right, Master.
Good to see you, Alvin.
Yeah, good to see you too, man. Take care.
Mr. J.
All
the best.
Okay,
right.
Take care, folks.
Yes, God bless.
All right.
Bye, Mr. G.
Yeah,
Alvin,
okay.
take care.
Nice.
Thank you.
Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, Looking out my window, and I'm a thinking of tomorrow, and I'm a wondering what the future will be. Thinking of the children who are the victims of oppression, beaten down by wars and eaten up by starvation. I'm saying, when there's ugly will be over, and the children can go out and play. I wanna see when all oppression will be done, and the people will rise up and say, freedom at last. Freedom at last. So free. Freedom has come. Freedom has come. Oh yeah. Sure heart, sitting in seclusion, I'm in my meditation, and I can hear the voice of the sufferers cry for justice. Ooh. Another ugly war is a raging, threats of nuclear war is arising, and the world is gripped by fear of mass destruction. I'm saying, When there's ugly will be over, and the children can go out and play. I wanna see when all oppression will be done, and the people will rise up and say, freedom at last, freedom at last. So free, freedom has come, freedom has come. Oh yeah, oh yeah. So much bloodshed and sorrows. There is no future for the youths of tomorrow. Yeah. So many mothers crying, so many funerals. Oh, when will it end? Say when there's only will be over, and the children can go out and play. I wanna see when all oppression will be done, and the people will rise up and say, freedom must go. Ooh.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Leader said that does not like the idea of protocol having been established, but I will stick to that. For the time being, protocol having been established.
They want to be seen. They want to sparkle for people. So they want to be found.
On the 10th anniversary of the theft, the police renewed their investigation, and new tips were coming in from all over the place. Someone had found the ruby slippers in a yard sale. Someone said they were in a diner. Even Jim Henson's son called in to say he'd found them in a friend's closet. Those actually turned out to be replica slippers. And everything else was, of course, a false lead. Michael was beside himself. How much had they been playing on your mind?
Oh, every day I would think about them. Because I had also heard that the thief had thrown him into a river. I had also heard that he had dropped them down the shaft of a mine. I mean, you cannot believe the horror stories I was hearing about them.
But then, a promising lead. In 2018, the FBI seized a pair in an undercover sting in a Minnesota coffee shop. But the big question was, were they